with looking at San Leandro's market, we are our average income, either household income, individual income, folks are just not able to make ends meet. So that's why I'm not supportive of 5%. I would like to start off the conversation at 3% and include a 65% of CPI. I'm also very concerned around the capital improvement pass-through. And I think that that's something that I really want to hear from my colleagues of kind of where they are. My concern around that is that some of the information that I've seen is, and in reading through the ordinance, is that some property owners, depending on the number of units, there are different financing mechanisms. And for some property owners that own 5 units and above, the financing is very different than from those that have less. So the pass-through is one thing that I do want to make sure we talk about. I am about to run out of time. So in terms of the units, the number of units, I would like to continue the conversation in keeping the ordinance as is, including including the, let me look at the presentation. Keeping it as is. So it would exclude single-family homes, but keep duplex, triplex, and anything above that that would be eligible for rent stabilization. I would like to start kind of just level set and see if this is something that we can work through. I have a bunch of other proposals to the actual language, but I think here we're trying to get some general direction and not specifically wordsmith the actual ordinance.
There will be many opportunities to comment on the language, and we can have a smaller working group through rules, for example. So big picture, I can also come back to you. But I would like to hear from other council members.
Sure. I don't have any time to cede, so I will just turn off my mic.
Okay. At this point in time, we'll go to Councilmember Aguilar.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, staff, for all of your hard work. It's visible. I'm sure we all appreciate it. I know this is a long time coming as an advocate for housing, rent stabilization. I'd like to direct staff with regards to the recognition of the urgent need to stabilize rents, prevent displacement, and preserve affordability for San Leandro residents. So I'd like to make some comments with regards to the draft rent stabilization ordinance with the following provisions with regards to the annual rent cap, the annual rent increase cap, to amend the rent cap limit to annual allowable rent increases to 65% of the regional consumer price index, CPI, not to exceed 3.5% in any year. I think this formula ensures that rent adjustments remain modest and predictable, aligning with actual cost of living increases while promoting long-term housing stability for tenants. With regards to inclusion for all residential rental properties, I'd like to keep it as is and have a discussion with regards to what that looks like. I think the owner-occupied rental properties should have some sort of exemption, but I'm just like to take a closer look at what that looks like. With regards to capital improvement cost recovery, I would like to revise the capital improvement cost pass-through provision to utilize the existing fair return standard for all rental properties, regardless of the unit count. The cost recovery shall be determined on a case-by-case basis, ensuring that property owners maintain the ability to receive a reasonable return on investment while preserving tenant protections from excessive rent increases due to capital improvements. And then there was a commenter with regards to the definition of a landlord. I'd like to include a clear and comprehensive definition of landlord in the ordinance that ensures clarity and enforcement and applicability. The definition should distinguish between property owners, property managers, and third-party agents where appropriate. And I think with regards to long-term housing solutions, like in developing this ordinance, staff should consider broader regional housing context and the need for long-term sustainable housing. I think Senate Bill 79 was just passed, so that allows, that's a kicker to create housing. I know this is something separate, but I know that. But anyways, I'd like staff to evaluate how San Leandro's rent stabilization policies can complement state level efforts and support broader goals for housing affordability, equitability, and equity and livability. But those are just my comments for now.
Okay, who is our next council member? Is there anybody online? Nobody online, so no other council members wish to speak on this item? Vice Mayor?
I'll speak. Yeah, I want to first, and as somebody, the first day I was on Rules Committee, I think we tackled rent stabilization. So that was really feeling like I was jumping into the fire. And so I really appreciate staff's work on all of this, because while there's been a ton of work, obviously, before I got here, I really appreciate both the opportunity for council members to share their perspective and for city staff to hear from all the stakeholders involved, because this is such an important and complicated policy decision. And I believe in trying to come up with a compromise to be able to get us started and being able to iterate and fix and change and improve as we go. So I do want us to at least start somewhere. Some of the things that I'm thinking about right now, and I know we're gonna have a lot more conversations about this. A few things, I often think about like what problem we're trying to solve and why we're here. And it really is about housing stability, and it really is about trying to ensure that there's housing affordability and that people are not displaced. And I can't think about what we're talking about right now, given where we're at in our current landscape. Where we started this conversation a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago is a very different place. So I am really, really cognizant of that. I represent a district that is incredibly diverse. 7 of our 8 elementary schools are Title I schools. Many of the students and families that attend my school live in apartments, and it is a very difficult time to be able to meet basic demands of living in this world right now. And so I really appreciate so much of the comment that's been given about how hard it is, and also how hard it is to try to pay for increased insurance and pay for capital improvements. That's where my starting point is right now, and I appreciate Councilmember Veras-Walton, talking about like our starting point, and I think that's where I want to be, is thinking through like where is a compromise, because so much has been laid out there, and I think about once things are out there, the point is to try to figure out like what works and what doesn't work. I've been, my background is in behavioral economics, and I think about how these sorts of decisions affect how people will behave. Initially, I didn't understand banking, for example, as much, and why have it and why not. And I started doing a lot more research around that. And so I want us to, as we're thinking through, what happens next, like if we have banking, research has shown that people will increase rents year over year, because that's your floor, because you're afraid you're going to lose something. And so we've had landlords come in here and say, I didn't raise rents every year. And then all of a sudden, research has shown that like more people will actually raise rents every year. And that's not something that we want to have either. And so I want us to kind of talk through each of the different mechanics, policy mechanics, and figure out like, does this work and where can we move? If we don't have capital improvement pass-throughs, like what else can we do to show that this is a real compromise? Because we don't, I think it's a pro stability, and this idea that we can come up with something that's going to keep people housed and keep housing providers in place. I am also still open to, there's 532 potential units that would be excluded if we had 4 units in total. And that's 4 units in total in San Leandro, not in one complex and then another complex. I think we can talk about all of that, but I do want us to, I think I'm still trying to figure out what it looks like, and to me, I still need a lot more information. But I hear that my council colleagues' apprehension around 5% and no CPI and the pass-throughs, and so I want us to. I really appreciate the conversations that we're having because I'm trying to process it all.
At this point in time, we will go to Councilmember Bolt online.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, so I just want to, the thank yous. I really appreciate all the work that's gone into this and the countless people that have reached out. I know staff, long hours, late nights, doing public meetings. And then to the council, as the vice mayor just said, it's not easy. I think this comes down kind of for me as more of a moral kind of thing. And, there's a lot of conversations going on about different aspects of this. And there's a lot of landlords that came up tonight and, God bless them. They were saying they don't really raise their rents every year and, 2 to 3%. So, that sounds good then, 3%. I don't have a problem with that. I think 5% is too high. I've only heard that. We do have people coming in and saying 5% is too low and you can't do that, but then they're not necessarily renters or people that live in our city who provide the housing. So that strikes me as odd. The small mom and pop stuff that we talk about, instead of us trying to define it, I say we just get rid of it. Let's not have any type of exclusions, right? Let's just eliminate all that. Let's be in a space of if you're providing housing, you're going to be under this ordinance. Vice Mayor brought up banking. I do not support banking. That is not, I don't think that's even proposed yet for us. So I hope we don't go down that path and start to institute something in that realm. There was a lot of talk about, this isn't going to create housing. Well, it's not supposed to create housing. The idea here is not that somehow we would get more housing units in the city of San Leandro. It's really about keeping low-income families rooted in a community and not being pulled away because they can no longer afford the rents. 3% is what is an annual income increase. And if we really want to help the residents out, we should not have rent going up more than their income goes up. I'm in a position I would do 2%. That would guarantee it's below 3%. And then any of the seniors who can only count on a 3% increase may start to see the gap close. because right now it's extreme. Housing compared to income for years has been way off, and it just continues to widen and widen and widen. And it's never in favor of the human being, it's always in favor of money going into other people's pockets. It's never in favor of the family unit and keeping people together. It's always in favor of the business. And so I urge us to make sure that we're doing this for the common family and not the more wealthier side of this equation. I'm not here to make millionaires into billionaires. I'm here to try and help the common working family unit stay in a home that they've been in, so they could see their kids go through the same school district, graduate with their friends, maybe have the opportunity to have some people come back. So my goal here tonight, I liked what Councilmember Viveros Walton laid out with 65% and 3%, but then I heard a change and I heard 65%, 3.5%. So I'm gonna go with 50% CPI and 2%, and whichever is lower. And I'm amendable to that, but I guess I'll have to come up a little bit to meet someone, but I'm definitely not gonna start high. I want to see us come down and be in a better place for the community and not necessarily for everybody that just wants to make a buck. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Azevedo, please.
First of all, I'd like to thank the whole community for coming out and spoke online, and to staff. Thank you all. I know it's a big hurdle to get to this, but I wanted to say that I support CPI, just a straight CPI with up to 3.75%. So that's my compromise, and with no pass-throughs. I agree with former council member Jim Perola, that we should put some money away in case we have to repair something. So I agree with them that. But I do agree about a means test. I don't know how much support I would get, but I believe, if there are rich people, renting over here, I don't know how many there is. I mean, if Donald Trump's family or someone was renting over, yeah, they shouldn't be able to do it. Because I know there was a New York City mayoral candidate that's bragging about he makes $250,000 a year and only pays $2,500 a month in rent. So yeah, if people are making a lot of money, then they shouldn't, but I don't know how much support. So I support a CPI with or up to 3.75, whatever's lower, and no pass-throughs. And if I can get support for a means test, but I don't know how many people are actually, because most of the renters I see in San Leandro, they're hardworking people, they're blue collar, so I don't think they make a lot of money here in San Leandro. They're just trying to strive to get through, and so that's what we need to do something. So I'll go up a little to 3.75 for a compromise. So understand landlords have to make money too, but tenants need to stay in their place. So I'm trying to make a compromise. So let's see if we can get support for that. Thank you.
And then Councilmember Azevedo, I apologize. I was speaking with City Manager about something. What did you say about pass-throughs? Did you say no pass-throughs?
Yes, no pass-throughs.
Thank
And
you.
I didn't know if I had a motion I wanted to motion mine to see if we can get support for it.
So no motions yet. but
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At this point in time, we'll go to Councilmember Simon.
Like my other colleagues, I'd like to thank staff for all the hard work that you've put in. Staff, city attorneys, it's really been a big job, a big lift here, and a lot of tough questions have been asked, a lot from the public, so you are appreciated. The public as well wanted to thank you, and of course we have our tenant side, we have our property owner side, and here in the city we're trying to look at all sides and not just one. We really want to look at all sides. Big picture, we have to also look at what is affordable and what is fair to folks. And that's kind of where some of my questions were going I guess is my one question, really was on the fair return process. And when you're doing a pass-through, how are you evaluating that? And I think the mayor brought an interesting point about if you are saving that money up, like you need a roof for 25 years and you're saving that money up in a account someplace, does that even show up when you evaluate the process? It sounds like it does not show up. So from the pass-through standpoint, I'll go to that one first. I would agree with, it sounds like most of my colleagues here, and not a pass-through, and it should go through the fair return process. I do believe that as a property owner, 25 years with a roof or whatever it is, we should be planning ahead and really saving for that. Just like I have to do with my house or anyone else who has property, you have to plan for it. Second would be the CPI process or the rental increase, let me put it that way. Looking at our tenants and looking at people long-term, how do they survive? How do they live if you're a senior or if you're someone who has a very limited very limited increase in your income? 5%, I think, is pretty rare for a senior or someone to make on their income. Further and further in the hole, that's all I could imagine happening to a renter. And when you're trying to take care of yourself, I heard another lady taking care of her mom at the same time, that's got to be difficult. So I would agree with my colleagues, and a CPI and a percentage of a CPI, I would be open to 65% of CPI. And as far as a cap, sounds like we've got a variety of ranges here. I am also open to the 3 to 3.5% range, leaning more towards the 3. But I do want to also, keep in mind there is the fair return process. So if any of these numbers are too low, my understanding is you need to go up. You can go up. Just have to show that you need to go up. And the last one is the mom and pop. Actually, Tom, can you clarify one more time? Just what do we have defined right now in the draft ordinance?
And just feedback on whether you'd like to exempt any of the range of smaller unit types, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, up to or below 8 units, any of those combinations, or none.
And
or just- or
what is
no.
a golden duplex?
A golden duplex is when the owner lives in one of the duplexes, so when the duplex units, so and is only renting out one.
Okay.
That's already exempted under the ordinance. Because there's an owner in one and a renter in the other unit.
The draft is golden.
Right, yeah, in the draft, the golden one.
Okay, I'm open to keeping the golden.
Yeah, so that one's in, okay. Do you have a position on no exemptions allowed? That's what we've heard here, or would you want to exempt any of the smaller categories?
I'm just keeping it as the golden.
Okay,
No other exemption.
no other, okay, thank you.
Okay, so at this point in time, I'll give a couple of thoughts. First, I'm a little bit disturbed that we're not really addressing the core questions of housing supply or addressing homelessness, which have always been the main concerns that have been expressed as the rationale for this. The city of San Leandro supports, through the county, significant housing assistance. So when we talk about displacement concerns, I'm concerned that that information is not really reflected in the fact that we are supporting a lot of people already. They would be explicitly excluded from this. And so I'm not quite sure, again, trying to figure out what it is that we're addressing. We can already see that the mayor's proposal decreases the cap from 10% at the state level to 5%. That is a significant reduction that the mayor has proposed. That is the mayor's policy proposal. And I just want the record to be clear that that is a significant decrease from what the state has set up as the standard. I do think that we need to think about these things in aggregate, because when we talk about banking, we can't separate, we shouldn't separate banking from the percentage cap or cost pass-throughs, because they all come together in terms of the ease for making sure that we decrease the number of fair return hearings, which can be quite burdensome from a cost perspective and simply drive up the cost of this program. In the end, I am concerned about the $1.6 million of cost for the program, because I don't see how that specifically ties to a benefit. And I am sympathetic to the fact that these programs just tend to grow and become more expensive. So I do think the pieces all need to work together. We need to find compromise. I do believe that the 5% that I've proposed is already a compromise. And I just feel like right now, all we're trying to do is see, well, who can come up with the lowest number? And that means you care more about people. But what we're trying to do in a compromise is find balance between the different competing needs. The property owners would say, you're already favoring the tenants because you've gone from what the state has established as the norm to decrease it to 5%. So that already reflects a compromise. And to suggest that anything that moves away from 5% is the compromise ignores the fact that the 5% already reflects a compromise. So at this point in time, I have no interest in moving away from 5% without having a more comprehensive analysis of the other pieces that go with that. So it's really a package. It's this percentage and this banking, this fair return process. I'm quite concerned about the fair return process because we have this colloquial understanding that we should be saving away. But by definition, these reserve accounts are not reflected in net operating income. That's just an accounting definition. And so if people are saving away and you're then measuring them on net operating income, how is the incentive really working? So I feel like we need to slow down and we need to make sure that this works the way that we expect it to, so that we don't end up with the classic rent control problems, which are the removal of incentive to improve units, i.e., and the maintenance of units. We don't need more litigation, more fighting, more bureaucracy in the city of San Leandro. I am quite concerned about subleases. I mentioned that during my question process. There are plenty of stories about folks that take their rent control apartments and in turn sublease them. I mean, that's just go to San Francisco, go to other cities. And I think that we need to make sure that we address that among other concerns. I've got a number of questions. I will forward them to you. I've already spoken with you, Director Liao, about that as well as legal counsel. So we'll continue on that. Big picture, you guys have done an amazing job. There's been a lot of work done, and I think that there's a really good framework. But I think that there's a lot of interdependencies, and we need to be very careful about how those interdependencies come together and how those interdependencies reflect compromise. And so that's where I stand on this at this point in time. But again, just to make the record clear, the mayor's proposal is as I've described before. I do agree with Councilmember Azevedo that it should be means tested. We keep selling this as protecting people in need. But that is not necessarily what we're doing here. And quite frankly, for half of the people, that's not what we will be doing. And so with that, I'm going to kind of yield back. I know that we're going to run out of time here. We have run out of time. So we're going to need to do an extension, or we can just continue at our next work session in November. It's up to the council. I can't remember who was first in this. I believe it was Councilmember Riveros Walton.
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion to extend to 11.
Okay, I'm going to go to Vice Mayor next. Well, I have you next in queue here. Let me ask this, just for simplicity. Is there anybody who seconds the motion? So Councilmember Bolt would like to extend to 11 as a second. Please vote.
Councilmember Bolt, may we have your vote?
Aye.
Councilmember Azevedo, your vote?
Aye.
Thank you. All votes are in. The motion passes unanimously.
So was that purely to extend, or were you in queue, Councilmember?
I wanted to keep speaking, but
Okay, please continue. Just punch in. There you go.
do I punch in?
You're on.
I'm in the queue. Okay. So we have several proposals on the floor, and I'm all except for one has voice support for 5%. So I don't think that that's a compromise between this body. So I think we're looking at probably somewhere in I think the next number was like 3.75 between there and 2%, but actually no one supported a 2%. So I'm somewhere into 3 and 3.75 is where I'm kind of, when I was taking notes on folks' comments. But stepping up from that, I think that we are at a point now where we have as much information as we can have. We've sent staff back several times to do lit reviews, to go find information, but the reality is that we cannot truly understand the magnitude of the problem if we don't have a rent registry. And until that is set up, we don't have the data available to truly understand what's happening in San Leandro. We are able to project and make some pretty valid assumptions about what's happening based on what's happening in the county and what's happening with our neighboring cities. But I do think that by passing rent stabilization, we are meeting the goals. And coming back to our housing element, this is not something that we are here kind of, just in the last 4 to 5 years thinking about. This has been in the works for a really long time. And the conversation in the community has been around keeping San Leandro as affordable as we can. And so I would like us to see, I would like to see us kind of think about where we're grouping in terms of these big 3 questions that staff have posed. Mayor, respectfully, I did not realize that 5% was the mayor's proposal. I thought it was a rules committee proposal. Didn't know that's where that came from. I thought there had been either a consensus or not, but
So I will clarify, because that is what I had proposed at the priority session. Specifically, I had proposed 5% and means testing.
okay. Well, I was under the understanding that that came from rules. I am not supportive at all for means testing for rent stabilization. I think it adds an element of complexity to an already complex policy. It is cities, at least our neighboring cities, don't have that, and I'm just that to me is not something that I'm willing to entertain. I am thinking about 3 to 3.75. I am not supportive of banking. I do want to have a more nuanced conversation about the pass-throughs. I think that that's something that capital improvements is something that we can kind of dig deeper into. And that's, but I definitely don't, I'm not supportive of a tiered system in terms of number of units and the number of, and the percentage that is allowed to be passed through. Like I mentioned in my earlier comments, I'm really concerned about the concept of double dipping, where property owners have the ability to deduct on their taxes or to report a loss, and they're able to get some either a tax break and passing that on, and especially fees, which can be used as a business expense, and so you can actually deduct it from your business expenses. I just don't see that being fair to tenants. So with that, I would just like to kind of, based on my notes on where kind of people were, other than one person, I don't see anyone at 5%, somewhere between 3 and 3.75. In terms of CPI, based on the comments, I'm seeing 50%, I'm sorry, 60 to 65%. The pass-throughs, I'm still kind of, people were kind of all over the place, so my notes don't really reflect that. So maybe that's something that we can kind of dig deeper in the time. And for MAMA and for the rental unit property types, I see a lot of consensus around keeping the ordinance as is and not excluding. So that's kind of where I saw based on my notes on the comments. So I'm just putting it out there so that we can kind of start thinking through where we have some clusters of agreement.
Vice Mayor, please.
Thank you. I guess I have a process question of this as a work session to give direction to staff. Is the intent to have a consensus about? Yes, okay. I'm getting a head nod. I'm not sure what it
Well,
is.
I'm just, do all work sessions result in a consensus? No, I don't think so. So, but City Manager, what would you like?
So the question that the Vice Mayor is asking was what was our goal?
Mhm.
So the goal this evening was to present our presentation. And these are the 3 questions that we would like to have consensus so that we can move this to the next step. The mayor is correct, as he said earlier. Other input is also welcome from the body, but we are looking for some type of consensus. I think leaning into what Councilman Viveros Walton is saying, my notes reflect similar. So if it's, in the range of 3, whatever it is, I don't need to put a number to it. And if we can't get all 3 or more, that's also fine. But we would love to move this meeting to a next meeting with something different than we walked in here with.
Okay, but I'm going to disagree with that latter point because it undermines specifically what I said, which is I think of this as a package, right? Because if you pick one thing, it might mean that you have a different interest in a second item. So that's why I believe that it's the totality of the pieces that we're trying to come as opposed to individually, because they run counter to each other. So I will continue with the Vice Mayor, please.
Okay. That kind of makes sense to me. I think I appreciate the clarification around the mayor's proposal, because really what the current, or what rent stabilization ordinance first draft that came out of the Rules Committee was meant to be a starting point for stakeholders to engage so that we could come up with something that would be viable and effective in the city of San Leandro. And my approach has been that each of the council members, the policymakers up here, have an opportunity to then share what their perspective is, and really like what their desire is based upon their constituents and what their values and morals are. And that's how we get to a compromise. I I did not actually, in my initial comments, as I was really kind of processing all of the information that we've been talking about, did not mention a percentage cap, and it feels like the number that nobody else has said, no, I was gonna say 4%, because nobody else has said 4%, and we're gonna anchor there. But thinking through where everybody else is right now, like if we're going from 2% to 5% and hearing everybody's comments, I am open to a compromise at closer to 3.75%. I still really do see the benefit of banking. I think that, to the mayor's point about the totality of everything, like that was not one of these questions. And maybe it's because there was not a lot of public comment about banking, but I do think about that, even from tenants' rights advocates who are the ones that actually flagged it for me, saying, you know what, like sometimes people will, because they're afraid of loss aversion, want to then increase every single year, even though they wouldn't normally have, because they have a good relationship with their tenants, and they say, you know what, like this year, like you are having troubles, and we don't want to raise that, but now you feel like you have to. I still do think that, I personally think that there should be exemptions for smaller rental properties. I think about the San Leandro landlords, San Leandro small housing providers, many of them who are people of color, many of them who are minorities, many of them who are sharing their increased costs of real, costs of having housing in the city, and it isn't, making millionaires into billionaires, although I'm sure there are some. But I that makes me, I think about what that could mean for housing supply. I also, it's not mentioned here, but I do think that for in terms of like a public hearing, especially at the beginning of this, I would like it if we actually review through a staff report. But I would love to be able to see more of a public hearing in 3 years when this really starts to, once it's from when it passes, so that we can really look at what works and what doesn't, because again, all of us are just working on the limited information that we have. And then I think in terms of capital improvement pass-throughs, like, I worry about the quality of housing, but I understand a lot of the arguments against it, and I'm willing to compromise on that. I think that makes sense. I think I answered all 3 of the questions, maybe.
Okay, at this point in time, we'll go to Councilmember Aguilar.
Thank you, Mayor Gonzalez. I just wanted to reiterate with regards to the annual rental increase, the annual rent increase cap. Let's revise it, the annual rent cap to be set at 65% of the regional consumer price index, not to exceed 3.5% in any year. I believe that this formula will ensure that rent increases remain tied to actual economic conditions without burdening tenants with disproportionate increases. I think as a community, we believe that 5% annual increase is way too high, especially amid high inflation and stagnant wages. This policy strikes as a fair balance between protecting renters and allowing reasonable returns for property owners. I do not support no rent banking. Do not allow rent banking under any circumstance. This is deferred to where unused rent increases should not be accumulated and applied in the future years. Allowing such banking undermines the goal of stability and predictability for tenants and could lead to sudden unaffordable rental increases. I do not support a means test. I reject any proposal to include a means test on income study in the rent stabilization program. Tenant protection should be universal and consistent, not based on income level. Means testing introduces administrative complexity, which, where there's potential discrimination and diverts attention from core policy goals of maintaining affordability for all of our renters. Inclusion on all rental properties. I would not include an exemption for mom and pop. Capital improvement pass-throughs, eliminate the tiered percentage-based capital improvement pass-through system. Instead, apply a case-by-case fair return process for all rental properties, regardless of the size. With regards to the economic impact acknowledgement, I recognize that economics policy, especially around housing, is inherently polarizing. While we must be mindful of housing providers' financial realities, our first obligation is to the thousands of renters facing unstable housing costs. rent stabilization is a necessary safeguard, not an economic experiment. And I think, rejection of the mayor's recommendation, I do not support the mayor's proposal as it lacks meaningful tenant protections and does not reflect an urgency for San Leandro's affordability crisis. I think that, with regards to the 5%. I don't think we talked about option, it's not in here, but option 2. I express full support for option 2 as presented during the policy discussions. I think the more staff time we have, the more robust and attention that we get with regards to this. And I think, with regards to, we have an opportunity here in San Leandro to make an impact to support our renters. I've lost a lot of constituents who've moved to neighboring cities, Central Valley, out of state, who really contributed to San Leandro and what makes us who we are. And I'm tired of losing folks to, cheaper rent and, middle of the nation. So I just want to make sure that we're protecting folks so that folks have predictability, stability of, like Carrie Ann Steele had mentioned with regards to her kids graduating with her classmates, being able to stay here and have predictability with regards to rent stabilization. So those are my comments. Thank you.
So we'll go to Councilmember Bolt next.
Okay, thank you. Okay, you guys twisted my arm. I will compromise 65% CPI with a 3% cap. The answer on the pass-through for capital improvements, absolutely not. No. Exclusions for mom and pops, no, because then we got to define mom and pops, and we're just muddying the waters. To what Councilmember Azevedo asked if he could get support for the means test, I don't want to support that. I'm watching Councilmember Azevedo, our brothers and sisters in the trades, just moving further and further away and not being able to afford rent because of these high rent increases. 5%. They're basically giving up their raise to the housing, and that's not acceptable. Banking, no, that's just another opportunity to go after the money. If you don't raise it, as most of the landlords have told us, they don't raise it by 3%. It's really hard for me to follow these conversations because they stand up there and tell us all the time that they don't raise it more than 2 or 3%. And these are our friends in our community that are telling us this. So really who we're trying to keep in check is the bad players out there that are going above. All the ones who are here talking with us are telling us that they don't raise it. So there's no need for a banking. What's the point of the means testing if they're not raising it 2 or 3% every year? We're just capping it at that. If they're not doing that, what's the point of the means test? I mean, I'm just listening to what the landlords are telling us. And this is what I hear. And this is what they've told me. So I'm willing to support them in this and just say, hey, look, let's just leave it at 3%. Let's get the bad players, big corporations that own all those companies or own all those homes in our community. Let's lock them in. So I will compromise 65% of CPI, 3% cap, no pass-through for the capital improvement, and no exclusions. And I'll put it in the form of a motion so we can try and move forward. It sounded like I had enough people in there to follow along with that because I compromised. and I'll leave it there.
Okay, so it's not an action item. Anybody else? Councilmember, I don't know, Simon, were you planning to punch in there? Thank you.
Well, after this extension, I think Councilmember Viveras Walton kind of summed it up pretty well. I mean, and we're kind of repeating ourselves. We are compromising a bit, but overall, I think the majority of the council is looking at a percentage of CPI or a cap in the 3 to 3.5 range. So I'm still at that 65 CPI. I've heard 3s, I heard 3.5, 3.75. So just somewhere in there. I mean, even 3.25 could be a compromise amongst everybody. So I think, that kind of moves us on from that point. And thank you for making that point, because I think we're all there. At least the majority is there. Again, as others have said, no pass-throughs. I do agree with the fair process, but with the fair process, I still have that concern about how are you determining if it's a fair process? If you are saving money up for a roof, but you don't even present that savings account, how is that even a fair process? So I'd like to go back to my point earlier in the meeting, and City Attorney had recommended if we could do an analysis to look at if we could look at our income, I wouldn't say income, our assets and our debt to better evaluate if there maybe is a better way to look at the fair process. Because right now it seems like something is missing. Not critical, but it would be nice to have that question answered. No means test, keeping mom and pop the way we have it in the ordinance. And with that, I do think that there is a majority of the council in that. As Councilmember Viveras Walton said in the beginning of this, at 10:30, I think that's kind of where we're at. Thank you. Oh, one other comment I do want to make too, as I mentioned in rules, and the mayor said today too, is it's a bit off topic, but we need more housing, which is separate than all this. We need to build more housing, period. So we have more rental units. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else online? Okay, so at this point in time, seeing no other hands raised, I'll give my final thoughts on this. I will stand by the position that 5% is a compromise, and is a compromise because 4 years ago, 3 years ago, people were saying 10%, 10%, 10% is crazy, 10% is crazy, it can't be 10%. I then proposed 5%. That is, by definition, a compromise. That is bringing it down. All that's happened is now that I've said 5, someone else is saying, well, if it's 5, then we can go lower than 5. So that is why it is a compromise and reflects that. That 5% specifically reflects also the concept that was written up there of no banking. 5% is a simplified approach that says we're going to keep it simple. We're going to have 5%. We're not going to get into this banking, and quite frankly, you won't need to get into the fair return. You squeeze that number so low that you get a lot more fair return hearings. It becomes administratively more expensive. As much as we would like to say, and I think someone talked about Pete Ballou being a great landlord, people have said very clearly, regardless of how you figured out, all the costs of this program will get passed through, period, full stop. And so our job is to try to deliver as much benefit for as low cost as possible. The means testing is specifically designed to make sure that the people that really need the help are getting the help. The other thought that I will continue to add here is that we set up the rent registry with a very specific purpose. That was set up specifically to enable the gathering of data, so that we could make an informed policy decision and not just pick some numbers out of the air. Because there are plenty of cities that do not have CPI or a percentage of CPI. And so just to say, well, in Oakland they do this, that's not really a good metric for what policy should be. We should consider the totality of the examples that are out there. So I still continue to believe that we are rushing through this process. We set up the rent registry for the purpose of collecting data, and we're not waiting for that data to be collected so that we can make an informed decision. Okay, at this point in time, I'm going to turn to city manager and say, do you have everything that you need?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What I have as my notes as takeaways for today is that what the council, as a majority body, would like us to bring back is a version of this that sits somewhere between 3 and 3.75% with a cap. I'm seeing head nods in that. I also see as a collective body that there is a majority for no capital pass-through with allowing for a fair return as well. I also see majority of with no means testing and no banking. The rest is a little gray.
I just want to, Councilmember Simon, did you have a position on banking? Go ahead and just. Sorry.
No banking, but did you mention, Janelle, your city manager, the CPI, percentage of CPI?
So I don't have clear consensus on CPI.
I thought I heard a majority was between 60 and 70 CPI or 3 to 3.75.
I disagree
max.
with that assessment. So I do not believe that's the consensus of the council.
I heard all of the people say that.
Well, we have 3 here, and Councilmember Bolt did say 65%, then that would be a
Right.
majority, 65%.
That's a
Which,
majority.
which four do you have? saying that?
65%.
Dylan, there's 4, 1, 2, 3, and Dylan.
Okay. So that's the majority of what council is directing.
Correct. Mayor.
Tom?
One area of clarity, just to supplement City Manager Cameron, I did hear clearly, though, no exemption on small property for staff. So I think that was, thank you. Just wanted to confirm. So, for the next draft, and I would emphasize, this is a draft. So this will elicit or evoke further comments, we know.
Yeah, because I do want to be clear, just so that's the guidance. So I will close with this comment. I'm quite concerned that a city like Alameda has the lower range than 5%, but if I'm not mistaken, they permit banking. So we say that we want to use other cities as a model, but yet we're not actually taking what those cities do. We're actually providing something that's tighter than what other cities permit. So that'll be my final thought. And with that, we are adjourned. It is 11 o'clock, 10:59.